This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. I crikey, way ahead of the chair. Was it the human deck chair? Asked J-Dog. Oh, no, you're reminding me that that's the nickname we gave him. I do apologise. Was it the haunted pencil? Is it Jacobean Rees Mogadon? I haven't heard that one before. It wouldn't be that spine-chilling parody of a Victorian child catcher by any chance, would it? The answer is Jacob Rees-Moggy, says Martin in Bristol. The haunted pencil, says Owen in High Wycombe. And I mean, it is funny but not funny. It's funny not funny, isn't it? That if you are searching for someone so completely devoid of integrity and insight, or perhaps the better word would be intelligence, then you can only really now go for Jacob Rees-Mogg. I find his career trajectory fascinating because he went from being a character that literally nobody could even conceive of putting into government. It's one of the great examples of how Brexit boiled the brains of half the country and the entire Conservative Party. Even among his own colleagues, Jacob Rees-Mogg was regarded as a truly ridiculous human being. Someone possessed of that curious combination that only 30, 40, 50,000 pounds a year's worth of school fees coupled with centuries of tradition at Eton College can deliver. And then Brexit created this weird space in which really, really poor people could profit. And by poor, I mean intellectually poor or politically poor or poor in terms of integrity. It's the same. I think of it as a trebuchet. What's the difference between a trebuchet and a catapult? Is trebuchet just a posh word for a catapult, or do they actually do slightly different things? Anyway, think of Brexit as a trebuchet that launched. They used to use trebuchets, didn't they, to launch diseased carcasses over the walls of besieged castles in the hope of spreading disease within the castle confines. Well, think of Brexit as a trebuchet and Jacob Rees-Mogg as a diseased carcass, a diseased cow carcass. The trebuchet launched some utterly disgusting items into the stratosphere and landed them smack in the middle of political discourse. You go back to 2014 and ask the average Conservative whether or not Jacob Rees-Mogg should be allowed anywhere near the cabinet, they'd have laughed you from here to next Wednesday. And in fact, if you go to a sensible Conservative even now and say, do you think Jacob Rees-Mogg should be allowed anywhere near the cabinet, they would laugh you from here to next Wednesday. I could be wrong, but I think even Liz Truss, I probably am wrong. Surely she should. But anyway, only under Boris Johnson, really, could somebody as fundamentally as ridiculous as Jacob Rees-Mogg find his way into the cabinet. Which is why it is, and of course we should give credit to my colleague and friend Nick Abbott for coining perhaps one of the best descriptions of Jacob Rees-Mogg, a monocle on stilts. My own humble contribution to the genre would probably be a penny farthing in human form. But we have reached the point now where he is, I think he's even got a TV show on one of these mad new television stations that are hemorrhaging money so that mysterious billionaires can influence the news agenda, or rather influence the next generation of the Conservative Party. If you need to find somebody to defend a historically successful night of by-election results for the Conservative Party, then at the moment the only person you can go to is Jacob Rees-Mogg. And he is currently claiming, I think, that Labour lost both by-elections last night, or at least they did very, very badly, and the Conservatives did much, much better than he expected. The trebuchet, I'm told, is by far the superior siege engine. Thank you, Adrian. And Andrew in Richmond informs us that all trebuchets are catapults, but not all catapults are trebuchets. Every day's a school day on this programme. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. So that's your starter for 10 over and done with. Who on earth could possibly publicly claim this morning that yesterday's by-election results were good news for the Conservative Party or bad news for the Labour Party? Then you throw in the client journalists who spent much of this week trying to claim that Keir Starmer was somehow losing his grip on leads. Poll leads, was somehow, in danger. I think I heard the phrase, in danger of missing an open goal. Or I mean, the desperation deployed now by people who sold you David Cameron, who sold you Theresa May, who sold you Boris Johnson, who sold you Liz Truss, who sold you Rishi Sunak, who sold you Brexit, who sold you austerity, who you can tell it's going to be a list day. It's got a list kind of day feeling to it already, hasn't it? But exactly the same people in my so-called profession who sold you all of those things and more. And of course, go back far enough, they sold you water privatisation, they sold you rail privatisation, they sold you increasing privatisation of the NHS, they sold you name it. If it's bad, you know who sold it to you, and they still dominate the news media, of course. And you look at that combination of fact and circumstance, and you are left with only one question. And that question is, who's actually still voting for the Conservatives? I mean, literally, who is still voting for the Conservatives? Because if you are an immigration-obsessed numpty who is falling for the idea that people who inherited millions of pounds from their grandfather's property empire and are dedicated to policies that would improve the fortunes of people who inherited millions of pounds from their grandfather's property empire, then you're going to vote for the Farage faction, aren't you? You're going to vote for this Reform Party. So they got double figures, I think, in one or two, in both, possibly in both results yesterday. 10% in Kingswood, an increase of 10% in Kingswood, and 13% in Wellingborough. So if you're still clinging to the carcass of Brexit and you've been persuaded that the reason why your wife left you is because of immigration, then you're voting for Reform UK, yeah? So that is between 10 to 15%. That sort of quasi-fascist rump that we always talk about, the people who would vote for Donald Trump if he was running in the UK, the people who were drawn towards Nigel Farage during Brexit and still somehow don't hold him responsible for the fact that all the promises he made have come to nothing. They blame instead, I believe, Gary Lineker. That's 10 to 15% of an electorate. And I know by-elections aren't indicative of national trends, but that's 10 to 15%. You look at the Conservative results as opposed to the percentage changes, and you find yourself wondering how they secured any votes at all when you consider the catalogue of what they have presided over. And that, I think, is what we will do today. We've got two ways into this. The first is the question of who is still voting for the Conservatives. So your sort of mad Uncle Keith, who gets all his opinions off Facebook, he's gone Reform UK now. Who are the people that are still left voting for the Conservatives? Who actually are they? Because when you consider what they have done to this country, you find yourself concluding that they would surely either stay at home, hold their noses and vote for the Liberal Democrats or even the Labour Party, or actually, if they're properly following the facts, they would be drawn to a genuine and sincere vote for one of those parties instead. And that's the question that I've got for you first. So I want to make that list, okay? I want to make the list of the last 14 years, the last 14 years of Conservative rule, the list of what they've done. Okay, and I know I do this quite often and then forget all about it, but I don't know whether you've noticed, I'm getting a lot better. I'm getting a lot better at remembering to do things tomorrow that I said I would remember to do yesterday. And a decent list of the greatest hits of post-2010 Tories is the perfect way to queue up the question of who on earth is still voting for them. Who on earth is looking at what Liz Truss did and looking at what Jacob Rees-Mogg is and looking at the congregation of circumstances that allowed somebody like Nadine Dorries to become Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport? Who on earth is listening to Kemi Badenoch's ludicrous claims about non-existent trade deals somehow being game-changing commercial interventions? Looking at honest Bob Jenrick oscillating between positions according to which way the wind is blowing? Looking at Suella Braverman and her claims that we should be confiscating tents from homeless people, looking at any of these characters now and concluding, yep, that's the team I want to be in. That they're my people. I'll have a bit of that. they say to themselves as they make their way into the polling booth. So, as I say, I can understand not voting because you've swallowed 40, 50, 60 years worth of anti-Labour bile from the Tory press. And I can just about, especially after the last few years, I can understand voting for the party that's even madder than the Tories, whatever the latest incarnation that Nigel Farage's filthy fingerprints are all over. I get that. Everything is the fault of immigration. The kids hate me because of immigration. The wife left me because of immigration. The boss fired me because of immigration. My car broke down because of immigration. I'm stuck in a traffic jam because... Actually, no, that last one isn't a joke because Nigel Farage did once claim that he had been caught in a traffic jam because of immigration. So I get that. They vote Reform. Who still votes Tory? Now, it may be that today falls into one of those categories where we find ourselves speculating about the motivation of other people. Or it may be that the dam is beginning to break, and if you are in that category, you'll pluck up the courage to actually ring me rather than send me an illiterate text about all the money being gone when the Labour Party leave power, or Gordon Brown selling the gold bullion, or I don't know, whatever meaningless, irrelevant fig leaf it is that you're desperately using to cover up your tiny political appendage this morning. But who still votes Tory? Both by-election results went about as well as Labour could have dared to dream. You can tell how well they went because Jacob Rees-Mogg is claiming they went badly. That's like the most useful thing Jacob Rees-Mogg ever does, to be honest with you. If you're doubting how well it went for Labour yesterday, just look at Jacob Rees-Mogg claiming it went badly. That's it. That's the proof. That's the pudding. Oh, and there's another one. There's a bloke called Rick Holden, who was doing the interview round this morning and was quite correctly asked by every decent journalist what the hell the Tories were playing at yesterday when they put out a clip of Sadiq Khan very briefly misspeaking about anti-Semitism. Do you remember earlier in the week I told you that I'd called Brianna Jai he instead of she for a nanosecond because I came back from a break intending to talk about something her dad had just said and went off on a bit of a tangent instead and talked about her and then said he and very quickly corrected myself to she. And I told you there was a weird corner of Twitter claiming that I'd misgendered her or deliberately, or that this was somehow evidence of my deep-rooted transphobia. And you can, when you do what I do for a living, I mean, you've been in this game as long as I have, you can laugh that off as the absolutely unhinged madness that it is. But could you imagine if a major political party had clipped that up, completely removed my immediate correction, and then put it out as evidence of what I really believe? So, look, if it's Wilhelmina Buncher numbers on Twitter with a bulldog avatar, and just get over yourself. But yesterday, the Conservative Party actually clipped Sadiq Khan describing the Labour Party's opposition to anti-Semitism, and briefly getting his words in a jumble and saying we are anti-racist and we are anti-Semitic. We are against anti-Semitism. They clipped off the last bit, and they put it out from their official party account. And the chairman of the Conservative Party, quite correctly this morning, hauled up for the appalling editing and the mislead and claiming that it hadn't been edited. The act of clipping audio is literally editing. It's the dictionary definition of editing. Here's a clip. If we didn't edit it, it would never end. Here's a clip of Rishi Sunak, for example. Okay, now imagine that we hadn't clipped it at the end. Just seriously, imagine what would happen if we didn't clip this at the end.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
No, we're not going to edit that. We're not. You see what he said? He said that we didn't edit it. We clipped it. They edited it because they stopped it at a point where the meaning it conveyed to the people listening becomes completely different from the words that Sadiq Khan actually said. That's disgusting lies from Richard Holden, and if he wants to sue me, he can. Richard Holden, you're a disgusting liar. Absolutely disgusting, especially in the week that the mayor has revealed AI, as in fake footage, is being used in an incredibly provocative and potentially dangerous fashion. People faking footage of the mayor of London speaking, and now the chairman of the Conservative Party defending disgusting lies being put out by the Conservative Party's own Twitter account. What has happened to our country when the party of government is being held to account by community notes on Twitter rather than so-called journalists? What are the journalists doing today? Rupert Murdoch's Times has a story about how 3% of people, only 3% of people think that Keir Starmer has handled anti-Semitism well. But if you read into the actual numbers below the headline, a majority of people think he's doing a good job. It is as if the truth has left the building and the Tories have waved it goodbye. The Tories have shown it the door. The Tories have broken what used to be proud British traditions. And yet still, in Wellingborough, 7,408 people voted for them. And in the other by-election in Kingswood, 8,675 people voted for the Conservative Party. So today the question is not how well did Labour do? The question is not what do these results tell us about the broader political picture? The question is not do the headbangers in the Reform Party now appear to have secured that guaranteed 10 to 15% of an electorate that the headbangers in any party will always secure? The question today is very, very simple. Who is still voting for these people? Who is looking at the last 14 years of national decline, the last 8 years of accelerated and utterly unnecessary national decline? Who is looking at the promotion of utterly unsuitable, often disturbed, deranged, delusional and frequently disgusting individuals to high office in these islands and concluding, yeah, what we need is more of that? Who? Who is it? Who are they? Is it your mum? 0345 6060 973. Is it your mad auntie Doris? 0345 6060 973. Is it your Tory boy son? 0345 6060 973. Or, I don't know, is it the blooming boogie? Who is voting for these people and what on earth is wrong with them?
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
So who are they? Who are they? 7,408 of them in Wellingborough, 8,675 of them in Kingswood. Looking at the last 14 years of government, looking at what's happened to our country, looking at the kind of character that is currently rising through the ranks of the Tory party, the Kemi Badenochs, the 30p Lees, and they're thinking, yeah, well, that's what we need. We need more of this. I mean, genuinely, comedy aside, and obviously I should have gone for Penry, the mild-mannered janitor, at the end of that last rant, a question of who the hell is voting for these people? Is it Penry, the mild-mannered janitor? And I know what you're thinking, James, it's Henry, but it's not. Mind blown on Friday morning. Fans of Hong Kong Phooey, I grant you, limiting the audience at the moment, age-wise, but it's actually Penry, short for Penrod, the mild-mannered janitor. Who votes for them? Who is it? Staying at home, I can understand. Going even madder, I can understand. But more of this, please? Who? Who is it? Matt's in Wellingborough, appropriately enough. Is it you?
It's not me, James, I'm afraid. No,
that's what they all say.
Afraid.
It's going to be like the opposite of Woodstock, isn't it, by this time next week? There'll be nobody in Wellingborough who admits to having voted Tory. But the numbers cannot lie, Matthew. It is 7,408 of your fellow constituents. Who are they?
Well, my guess is that they are more senior members of the community, because when you've looked at the very limited presence that there's been since the start of this by-election of the Conservative Party.
Yes.
Most of them have been, on the social media posts that they've had, have been more senior members. I mean, to put a bit of context on this, where Wellingborough was voted 62% in favour of Leave. Right. So it comes as no surprise at all that actually the Reform Party did relatively as well as they did. Mm. But you say that, and you're right, but you've still got that question of who are they? Are they the people who think there is a good Brexit and it went to a different school, or the people who are believing Kemi Badenoch's nonsense about trade deals, or this ludicrous rhetoric about sovereignty? That the people who still think that's a good idea are almost as mysterious as the people who are still voting Tory. But I grant you, they cross over a bit, don't they? They do, and you know, to put further context on it, Wellingborough and the area around it is a really diverse area. We've got a vast array of different nationalities in the area who prop up the economy, do a huge amount of work to keep this area as a growth area. And it is a growth area if you look at things like house prices in the East Midlands.
So if you want to get rid of all the foreigners and you realise that Farage's crew are never going to get anywhere near power, then you might actually, despite having had your brain boiled by Brexit and racism, you might still vote Tory, even though they've presided over epic increases in the immigration that you blame for your life being rubbish.
It's exactly right. And then the crazy thing is, the Conservative candidate actually knocked on my door, and as I said to your researcher, I've been a sort of floating voter in the past. She asked me, she introduced herself, and she asked me, could she count on my vote? And I said, no, I don't think so. And she just said, thank you very much, and walked away. And I thought, well, where's the effort there to convince people?
But were you hand on heart, were you convincible?
Probably
Let's do some
not,
role play. Let's do some role play. Hello, I'm your latest Conservative candidate. You may recognise me from being on Peter Bone's arm at the last election. Can I count on your vote?
Yeah, you probably not. No, and to be fair, I wanted to give the woman a chance, but yeah. I could see the rest of the canvassers knocking on doors and walking away. And I don't know whether or not you've seen the. But
we're going to stop the boats, sir.
Well, if you look at where Wellingborough is on the map, geographically, you couldn't get further away from the coast.
Yes, but they'll be using hovercrafts next, sir, and we're going to stop the hovercrafts.
Well, it'll be drones next as well, won't it? But
also, we're going to grow the economy. You can only trust that Labour haven't got a plan. I just heard Rishi Sunak, the coke addict, say so.
Well, I think the only plan that the Conservatives actually had in this, and I feel a little bit sorry in some respects for the Conservative candidate. Because I think she was a sacrificial lamb. She was a sacrificial lamb.
Yes, okay. You wouldn't take that. A poison chalice.
Yeah, exactly. And she's now saying she's going to run again next time round. Well, I think it wasn't Einstein or somebody saying the definition of stupid is doing something over and over again with failure.
Yeah, it wasn't Einstein. It was someone else. That's what everyone says it was Einstein. I hear you. If you're wondering why I just referred to Rishi Sunak as a coke addict, it's because he told us himself.
I'm a coke addict. A total coke addict.
And we haven't edited that at all. Using the Richard Holden, chairman of the Conservative Party dictionary, this is proof that Rishi Sunak is a coke addict.
I'm a coke addict. Total coke addict.
We haven't edited it at all. Seriously, Dickie Holden told me that the definition of edit is something different from what I always thought it was as someone who's worked in radio, ordering other people to edit stuff for over 20 years. So just for the avoidance of doubt, according to Dickie Holden, chairman of the Conservative Party, here is conclusive, unedited proof that Rishi Sunak is a coke addict.
I'm a coke addict. Total coke addict.
Annoying schoolboys in the background trying to join in the conversation have spoilt the crystal clear quality of my clip there. But what I won't do is use AI to make it sound more convincing. That's probably where Richard Holden and his mates will go next. It's 10:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:33. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Well, the question of who is still voting Tory? We haven't even got round to making a list of all the reasons why you really shouldn't be. If your brain is boiled, then go and vote for what's his chops' party. But if your brain isn't boiled and you can't abide Labour for whatever reason, then you stay at home or you vote Lib Dem or Green. Who the hell is still voting Tory? The party that brought you 30p Lee and Jacob Rees-Mogg. Both extremes, if you like, of the class structure in the UK, and between them, perfect proof that it means nothing in terms of integrity or intellect. Both as thick as mince, and both profiting and riding high in the last few years of Conservative governments. It's just bizarre. Who are they? 10:34 is the time. We should probably do a little bit of grown-up analysis as well as the slightly more, shall we say, excitable coverage that I've been engaging in so far. Luckily, Lewis Goodall is on hand. Busy day for Lewis today. He'll be with you on LBC from 6, and it's probably probably laying down, I believe is the correct phraseology, probably laying down one of those newsagents podcasts in the course of today as well. I'm working on the principle, Lewis, that you can tell how badly it went for the Tories because Jacob Rees-Mogg is saying it went well.
We prefer slapping down, as a matter of fact, James.
Slapping down.
Slapping down the podcast later on today. Yeah, well, look, I mean, there's a few things that your listeners and all LBC listeners and everyone else should remember when they're listening to some of this analysis. There's a lot of talk around about how Labour have done badly in these by-elections because they've got fewer votes than they did in these constituencies in 2019 in a general election where they lost appallingly, and in both of these constituencies where in 2019 they lost appallingly. That's not how elections work. Elections work by getting more votes in the election that you're fighting than your opponent, not fewer votes.
Well, you don't tempt fate. There could be a bill in the House of Commons next week in the same way that they've tried with Rwanda to redefine what counting means.
Well, indeed. So, of course, turnout is always lower in by-elections. I mean, it is almost never going to be higher than it was in a general election because, naturally, a lot of people don't even know that it's happening in their constituency on a particular day. There is no other way of describing these results than a brilliant couple of results for Labour and an absolutely catastrophic set of results for the Conservative Party. And if it were just these results, then of course you could say, well, this is just a couple of results. But obviously there is now something of a pattern, both in the Sunak premiership, where of course they lost Mid-Bedfordshire, Selby and Ainsty, but also where you go back to the Johnson premiership as well, where, they were losing seats, in Chesham and Amersham and in Shropshire, North Shropshire and other seats as well. Either to the Liberal Democrats, Tiverton, either to the Liberal Democrats, usually with swings north of, 10%, 15%, 20%, or to the Labour Party. And the thing that really strikes me about this, James, is that if you'd said to me, in 2019, the Labour Party would be winning in seats like Selby and Ainsty, they would be winning in seats like Wellingborough. It would have been, even in a by-election in those years, it would have been completely unimaginable. Why? Well, largely why? Because Brexit was so completely salient. The fact that the Labour Party can win in such heavily Brexit leave voting seats says something about how the politics of Brexit has unwound and says something about how little salience that issue now has, at least for the Labour Party.
So oddly, and this has happened quite a lot lately, and of course part of the problem is people like us who have to have opinions in the moment of the moment, and then the facts change, or it turns out that some of the parameters in which we framed those opinions may have been illusory. But actually, the great political reset that people claimed had happened in 2019 may prove to be very, very temporary, and the really significant generational political reset might be happening later this year.
Absolutely, it could. Look, I think it will be a question for historians to ponder about whether the Conservative Party could have achieved a permanent realignment of British politics after 2019. I actually think that was potentially, at least, within their gift. I think I think what lost it is that Johnson had neither the intellectual application nor, to be honest, the honesty to ram it home. I think they genuinely got to a potentially post-Thatcherite moment in 2019. Two things happened. Johnson was too feckless, and also the Conservative Party didn't actually want it. There was a sort of political landscape that was there for them that was genuinely post-Thatcherite, and it just required a bit of flexibility. Actually, one of the great myths of British politics is that the Conservative Party is pragmatic. It's really not very pragmatic anymore. It probably was once, but it's not now. As soon as they have the opportunity to flex back to a more traditional version of themselves, i.e. Thatcherism, which they literally did in a sort of cosplaying fashion under Liz Truss, they did so. They could have had the opportunity with the new seats that they'd won to basically be more or less what Johnson was offering, which is a slightly soggier, kind of slightly right on culture, left on the economy, and that could have probably guaranteed them some hegemony. It hasn't happened that way, and as you say, it could, later this year, could be the realigning moment. What I would worry about for Sunak at this point now is it is possible that we're at just one of those points in the electoral cycle where it doesn't actually matter what the government does, and it doesn't matter what they say. It's like, as you say, James, people like you and me, we're paid to have opinions, we're paid to think about politics day to day. Our opinions change day to day. The public are sort of glacial in their opinion. Most of the time they're only sort of vaguely paying attention. But when they change their mind, like a glacier, it really moves. When the glacier moves, it really moves. And there's not much you can do to stop it. So my worry if I were number 10 and Rishi Sunak would be, at this point now, the public have just stopped listening. They've made up their mind.
And that is, regardless of what they throw into the mix, that is, as you suggest, likely to stay the same. Lewis, thank you. I know you. Are you going to be writing about this in your new book?
What, this particular day, this conversation?
No, not today, not necessarily, not this conversation. Even I'm not that self-referential. I go straight to the index. I can't believe it. What were you doing on February the 16th? No, I mean that stuff about the possibility that the Tories could have somehow transformed.
I will. Well, I mean, if it proves to be right, then I'll definitely write it.
I find that absolutely fascinating.
Inevitably, I'll just forget it.
There is one circumstance in which the Conservatives could claim to have done rather well yesterday. And that would be if they got Laura Trott to count the votes.
Well, yes. Yeah, but she's probably not got a future as a returning officer.
Lewis Goodall with you at 6 o'clock on LBC. And before that, on the soon-to-be slapped-down newsagent podcast. I think I have to credit Stan for that rather splendid Laura Trott joke. Absolutely remarkable. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to just tell me who is still voting Tory. And because I don't really know. Here's Kaz, who says, I have intelligent ex-military friends who are probably secretly racist. Some of the coverage I've been reading about the military lately suggests they don't even need to be secretive about it. But remember, the Secretary of State for Defence, Grant Shapps, thinks that to try and address the rise of extremism in the ranks would be too woke. But they are upwardly mobile, aspirational northerners. There's absolutely no reasoning with them. I like that. Because I see it on social media. I get the occasional call. People who have had their... I don't want to be too rude. People who have arrived at the conclusion that Labour is always bad, that even if you haven't got a pot to pee in, the Labour Party are going to take it away from you and give it to a disabled person or an immigrant or an unemployed person. That is probably the greatest success politically of the Conservative Party in the 21st and 20th century. You persuaded people who haven't got much that rather than acting in their interests, as history teaches us, right, whether you're talking about the foundation of the welfare state or the foundation of the NHS, whether you're talking about the redistribution of wealth or the provision of Sure Start centres and libraries, rather than believing that the Labour Party is dedicated to improving the lot of the working man and woman, significant swathes of the population have been successfully persuaded. Look, billionaires don't buy newspapers for fun, and they don't even buy them to make money anymore. They don't set up television stations to make profits. They lose £30 million a year on one of them, and God knows how much on the other, which I'm told isn't long for this world. They buy newspapers and set up television stations in order to influence the public and to get the public to vote in the interests of the kind of people who can afford to buy newspapers and set up weird television stations. It's not exactly rocket science. So who is still voting Tory? Answer, probably people who believe that voting in the interests of secretive billionaires will somehow protect them from the Marxist ambitions of the Labour Party. But I don't know people like that, really. I mean, well, I do, a few, but I don't know how many of them there are. I don't know how you count them. Beverly's in Oxford. Who are these people?
Well, I think that anyone who chooses private school education is a Tory voter at the moment because
no, I can disprove that immediately.
Yeah. Well, I think I live in an area where there's a high concentration. Well, not everyone. There's a high concentration of private schools where I live.
Yes.
And I know and it's not me. There's huge concern about the Labour's pledge to add the VAT and how that will affect the costs and how that will affect parents.
Have you told them to cancel their Netflix subscriptions or to get a better job?
No, I'm coming from a perspective where I'm in the other extreme.
No, I know you are. I'm just giving you some conversational gambits.
Yeah,
tell them to stop eating avocados every morning and just have some porridge instead. There's loads of ways they can save money.
Yeah, well, I think that, though, the people who, that's their major interest, let's say, is their finances and having a comfortable life. And I think people vote about what's their major interest. I don't think everybody is informed about all aspects of politics, or they just turn a blind eye to it or only pay attention to the aspects that really affect them.
But the polling doesn't... I hear you, and you're obviously right in the great scheme of things, but the polling doesn't support your position specifically on the VAT for school fees stuff. And the proof of the pudding will, of course, be in the eating. Some schools will absorb it. It's highly unlikely that the whole 20% will be passed on to fee-paying parents. But the demographics of these two by-elections probably fly in the face of what you're saying as well. The suggestion that this rump vote is probably older and therefore more likely to mobilise means I don't think that the 20% VAT on private school fees is going to explain many of these 7,000 or 8,000 votes in each respective
No, not in this particular case, but I think in other situations where that's going to happen, yeah.
We must get back to it. Here's the problem I've got. Is you're a teacher, I think you said. Did you say that?
Yes, I am, yeah.
And therefore you're fascinated by this story, and you're fascinated by private education in general, as am I, as both someone who was privately educated and someone who privately educates their children. I don't know how interesting other people find it. So we're talking about 7% of the population max, 7 to 9% of the population max are in this catchment area. You can throw in another 5 or 6% of people who hope they will be one day. Many of the people I know aren't that spooked by it, but I appreciate other less well-off people will be. Outside that circle, it's actually a vote winner.
Yeah. It could possibly be,
It speaks to natural justice. It speaks to an attempt to reduce the number of people availing themselves of an obviously unfair advantage, despite already being in the most privileged cohorts of the country already. So we shall see. I mean, it will be interesting. 46 minutes after 10 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thank you, Elsie. You could also, any parents worried about not being able to pay school fees, we must tell them about value baked beans, the value range in supermarkets. So what have we got? If you're worried that you won't be able to pay your school fees, there's value range food in supermarkets. You can cancel your Netflix subscription, stop going on so many holidays, and just eat porridge every morning instead of avocado on toast. It's so easy, isn't it? And where did I get that stuff from? People like Richard Holden, whose definition of the word edit means that Rishi Sunak is a coke addict.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
51 is the time, and we haven't had time to make the list. He's making the list. Something like that, is it? No? Just me. I know it's a Christmas song, but it's the only song I can think of about making a list. There's no songs about making lists that are based in Febuary, Keith. But I wanted to make a list. We'll have to do this at some point. I'm writing the chapter for the book, for the paperback version. I'm doing an updated version. Do you know, this is going to sound so cocky. I'm worried now that when the paperback comes out in May, the hardback's still going to be a bestseller. That puts you in quite a difficult position commercially. But these are problems that I'm comfortable absorbing. It's still only a tenner on Amazon. But the new chapter I have to write this weekend, I've been wondering, I've already started it, but you want to find your way in. The country going into recession while the Prime Minister is failing to mention Brexit, and his former employer Goldman Sachs is crediting Brexit with knocking 5% off our economy, is the perfect distillation of the mess that we're in, the mess that my whole book essentially seeks to unravel and describe. But then, just for a bit of comic effect, you throw in Jacob Rees-Mogg claiming that things actually went very well. He's the political equivalent of the Monty Python knight, isn't he? Who's dancing around on one leg claiming that it's only a flesh wound. It's only a flesh wound. And speaking of Tories, past and present, do you remember when Priti Patel came out in favour of terrorism?
Well, there is a police investigation, rightly so, taking place right now. And this offender clearly had some history, some clear history in relation to counter-terrorism offences. I announced a very clear package of measures, basically all aimed at counter-terrorism and counter-terrorist offenders. We will also be announcing some fundamental changes in addition to what we've already said that we will do to deal with counter-terrorism and counter-terrorist offenders.
So, the Tory party yesterday put out a clip of Sadiq Khan misspeaking and immediately correcting himself. The chairman of the Conservative Party this morning, Dick Holden, has said that is perfectly reasonable and it wasn't edited at all. It was clipped. That long clip was edited and clipped because they mean exactly the same thing in the context of radio. But that was Priti Patel being too stupid to realise that she'd made a mistake again and again and again and again. Extraordinary, really. In fact, just to bring it down to a similar length to the clip that the Tory party tweeted from their own account before being community noted for being despicably dishonest, it would sound a little bit like this.
Well, there is a police investigation, rightly so, taking place right now. And this offender clearly had some history, some clear history in relation to counter-terrorism offences.
What is Priti Patel's problem with counter-terrorism? Why is she opposed to fighting terror? Why is she a pro-terror? Priti Patel is pro-terrorist. I can tell because I heard her say it on a clip that definitely hadn't been edited.
Well, there is a police investigation, rightly so, taking place right now. And this offender clearly had some history, some clear history in relation to counter-terrorism offences.
Hang on, I must have misheard.
We will also be announcing some fundamental changes in addition to what we've already said that we will do to deal with counter-terrorism and counter-terrorist offenders.
I can't believe it. That's a former Home Secretary coming out in favour of terrorism. Well, at least the Prime Minister is not a coke addict.
I'm a coke addict. Total coke addict.
Crikey. Well, anyway, according to Dick Holden, none of that has been in any way edited, or rather clipped, or edited, or clipped. I can't remember. You'd have to ask him. He won't come anywhere near me. Jules is in Lichfield. Jules, who's still voting Tory?
Well, unfortunately, I know a lot of working class people that are going to be voting Tory, but in particular, I've rung you about my mum.
Okay.
My boomer mother, who is from what I suppose would be considered a lower working class background.
Okay.
Daily Mail reader. Huge fangirl of Boris Johnson.
Still.
And in fact, just last week, she said she'd vote for him again and she loves him.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing that really bothers me about this is she's an intelligent woman.
Clearly.
And she was a beneficiary of the Attlee government, as were my uncles, and some of those are still banging on about Jeremy Corbyn. And
banging on about how awful he is or how brilliant?
Awful. No, they're all Tories. They're all working class Tories. Yeah.
So what is it?
About Jeremy Corbyn.
What is the what is the sort of the hook upon which they hang their opinions? What is it that they think the Tories will do for them, or is it more of a, because you bring Boris Johnson into the conversation, the picture changes a little because that looked a lot like a personality cult, didn't it? But what does she think?
My mum loved him.
Why is she frightened of Labour, if that's the right word to use? What does she think Labour will do to damage her existence?
She's literally being brainwashed by the paper she reads.
Yeah,
and that's the only thing that I can put it down to, because she's benefited directly from a post-war government, and like most boomers have, and so they've made a better lives for themselves and for their children, which was made possible by a Labour government. But she lived through the Thatcher years. She saw all the decimation of that. We've seen it again in the last 14 years. She seems to think that they're fiscally responsible. And the Daily Mail tells her on a daily basis who to vote for.
Yeah, so she doesn't, and why would she? She's got better things to do. Actually look at the numbers, look at the real. I mean, surely she's noticed the cost of living going up.
No, because she's got a pension. She used to work for mental health. So she lives with me as well for health reasons.
Okay.
So she's got quite a lot of money in the bank, and she's not affected by it. She doesn't believe me when I say that in my constituency here, Michael Fabricant's constituency, we now have 8 homeless people sleeping around the town centre. We've never, ever had a problem with homelessness. We've got 4 food banks. This is a tiny city, it's more like a town.
I know Lichfield quite well. It's a beautiful.
Do you?
Yeah,
it is a beautiful place.
I suppose everyone at this point says Dr. Johnson, don't they? And you just roll your eyes.
They do. Or Cromwell.
Or Cathedral.
Yes, 3 Spires, yeah. But it's a very affluent place. It's a very affluent place.
And then that's the trick then. All you do is persuade people like your mum that if Labour get in, they will be less affluent. They will be less well off. I will protect.
Basically. And my dad, you see, he was a landowner, so I've inherited a farm.
Okay.
And he was a Tory voter. And he, it worked better for him because obviously the Tories were better for people with land because they'd lower taxes and get rid of inheritance.
But that's not a mystery, is it? That's self-interest.
No,
and we're all self-interested to a greater and lesser degree. But for your mum, it's not that at all.
She left school at 15 to go to work. She had to educate herself. And all of her brothers and sisters did. There were 10 of them in a 2 up, 2 down in a very poor area of Birmingham. That's where she grew up. And she should know better, I think, but I really can only put it down to the paper that she reads.
And how much longer is that going to last? One wonders that the readership is in decline. The battle to inherit these huge audiences. That's why they're so terrified of the internet. It's why Elon Musk bought Twitter, I think. That's just my personal opinion, because it was becoming a platform where hard right opinions were being correctly attacked and undermined by reality and facts. So, kind of man who 50 years ago would have bought a newspaper, bought Twitter instead and sought to remould it in his own image, bringing back all sorts of monstrous liars and allowing them to look as valid and as authoritative as people telling the truth. The quote that I think we have to end this hour with, and a quote you have heard before on this programme, but not for a while, comes from Aneurin Bevan, and it is this: how can wealth persuade poverty to use its political power to keep wealth in power? Here lies the whole art of conservative politics in the 20th century.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, we've talked about so many different things together over the years, haven't we? Some things come round again. In fact, most things probably come round again. I'd struggle to think of anything we'd only talked about once. Parking tickets? No, I don't think we've ever done parking tickets, have we? Have we ever done? Did we do it? Well, we did it once, didn't we? In a very postmodern, ironic way. It was an election day, so we did a very self-referential conversation about who has had the parking ticket in the. I think we did it straight, didn't we? It's the most ridiculous. Anyway, I think we've only done that once. Although never say never. I mention that because we have to be conscious of repetition. Bizarrely, the period of greatest success for the programme was when we talked about the same things every day. Where Brexit actually is probably what pushed us into the stratosphere, but also, tragically, talking about COVID when we were in the terrible grip of the pandemic. Nobody wanted to talk about anything else. So one of the things I've been reflecting upon since Steve Wright's tragic passing is the alchemy of radio, the mad alchemy of it. Those of us who are blessed with employers that don't insist that we're formulaic, that let us do more or less whatever we want on air. We have enormous responsibility, of course, but also we have enormous freedom. And I've been thinking about that a lot since Steve passed away, because you can't write it down. You just can't know. It's like so many variables in place. Like if you and me are going to create magic together one morning, we can't plan it, really. It will just happen. It's mad. But one of the things you are conscious of, and that does fit into preparation or craft rather than art and magic, is repetition. So I'm very conscious of when did we last have a conversation, or you can't do that every day, or you can't with most subjects. Brexit and COVID would be exceptions, wouldn't they? But I wonder if you can guess the conversation from the last couple of months that I have been stopped and spoken to about most often. Most recently, actually, at the cinema last night. And speaking of being stopped in the street, I just got a lovely message off Julie in Uxbridge, who collared me in Chinatown yesterday to sign her book, which she had in her bag. And Julie, you really have absolutely nothing to apologise. It was a delightful encounter for me. And although, as you say, I had just put in a shift, it's only 3 hours long. Let's not get carried away. It's not like working on a building site. But the conversation, can you guess what it would be? The one that for the last people have come up to me and said, I really enjoyed that, or that was really important. And I realised that we'd never actually done it before. We'd done the subject in broad brushstrokes on previous occasions, but we had never done it in the way that we did it. About 6 weeks ago, was it? Or was it, give or take, within the last couple of months? Can you guess what it was? And it was motivated in part by frustration and anger with the way the subject is often covered elsewhere. Quite often the way we approach subjects is motivated by frustration and anger about the way the subject is covered elsewhere, isn't it? And we keep getting proved right. This was also one of those occasions where I had to reflect upon my own wrongdoing in the past because, to my shame, but to my embarrassment, not to my shame, I used to be somebody who would approach new sounding diagnoses with skepticism and a degree of derision. So if, for example, you were to tell me that your child had ADHD, I would say, oh, you mean they're naughty. We just called it naughty when I was young. And I meant it. I haven't fully worked out why I meant it. I wrote about it in my last book, How Not to Be Wrong, The Art of Changing Your Mind. But you never fully get to the bottom of why you end up holding opinions that are demonstrably wrong and also deeply offensive to people who are living the experience that you're dismissing or questioning. But my industry is full of privileged old men who think that the world hasn't changed since they were at school, or think that the world hasn't changed since they started work, think there's nothing wrong with pinching backsides in the typing pool or wolf whistling women in the street. My industry is full of old men who think that a new sounding diagnosis like ADHD, or if you were to go back 20 years, dyslexia, is just a load of woke nonsense, to coin a modern phrase that they're fond of, and that these children just need a good old kick up the backside, or the return of corporal punishment, or to be taught some resilience, or to pull up their socks, or to get a stiff upper lip. It's a very easy rut to fall into because it frees you of the responsibility of thinking. It allows you to approach any story from a position really of binary provocation. Here's a story. Okay, how can I invite people to attack the vulnerable? That's how you approach conversations about long-term illness. It's how you approach conversations about immigration. It's how you approach conversations about unemployment. It's how you approach conversations about single mothers. It's how you approach conversations about teachers going on strike because their circumstances at work have become unbearable. Ditto junior doctors, ditto nurses, ditto paramedics. You just look at a story and you think, how do I get... And this answers the question, by the way, that we asked in the last hour, like, who's still voting Tory? The answer is the people who accept this invitation every day. I'm going to hate them, I'm going to hate them, I'm going to hate... Do you know what you're supposed to be getting angry with today? Have they told you yet? Do you know what you're supposed to be getting angry with today? Trains. Or specifically train lines. So here in London, one of the most annoying elements of the old public transport map, the old railway map, underground, was that the underground lines had their own distinct colour and were quite easy to follow, and they had names like Piccadilly or Bakerloo or Victoria or more recently Elizabeth. But the overground was all the same colour and it just had the name London Overground. And it is quite confusing. If, for example, you were trying to make your way from Gunnersbury to Highbury and Islington, it would look as if you could do it all on one train. Actually, I think that's a bad example. Possibly you can. Or you would have to change at Willesden Junction. And all of the orange lines were all London Overground. So yesterday it was announced that Transport for London has given them new names. And some people are furious. If I tell you what the names are, will you be able to work out why they're furious, do you think? I don't know. Possibly you will. They've called one of them Windrush. As a mark of gratitude to people who came from hundreds of thousands of miles away to help rebuild our country after the Second World War. And they were rewarded, of course, with racism and latterly the threat of deportation. Personally, I think that naming a railway line after them is a beautiful thing to do, but compensating the people who had their lives turned upside down by Theresa May and Nick Timothy's time in the Home Office would be an even more powerful gesture, one that sadly is not in the gift of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who is ultimately behind this initiative. So you've got Lioness, Mildmay, Windrush, Weaver, Suffragette and Liberty. Beautiful. Speaking of Windrush, I don't know if you've seen the statue at Waterloo Station, but my God, takes your breath away. It's absolutely beautiful. It somehow manages to convey so much, despite being inanimate molten bronze. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you haven't seen it, go and have a look. Seriously, it's worth detouring. If you're on the South Bank and you're not planning on using Waterloo to get to and from wherever you're going, if you're in London, just go into Waterloo Station, have a look at the Windrush statue. It's not only a thing of absolute beauty, it's a magnificent reminder of the power and the importance of public art, which reaches places, of course, that other interventions simply cannot reach. So that's why I used to be an idiot about ADHD, because I used to occasionally fall into the trap of thinking, well, not even consciously thinking, how can we attack these people, but thinking, if it wasn't like that in my day, then it can't be real. I got some messages last time we talked about it from people who were treated similarly with dyslexia. And I've been here for just over 20 years now. And do you know what? I think in my early days on LBC, I don't think I'm imagining this. I think you would still hear people or still get calls from people who thought that dyslexia was just a fancy way of describing thick people. I know that dyslexic people experienced that before the diagnosis became commonplace, and to a degree afterwards. But I'm pretty sure the same sort of lazy, knee-jerk rhetoric of dismissing and denigrating ADHD or ADD or other special educational needs, I'm pretty sure that they used to deploy exactly the same language and approach to dyslexia. Which is gross, isn't it? Because you don't need me to tell you that some of the cleverest, most gifted and creative people that have ever lived with dyslexic, but without help from the educational system, their talents may never have been discovered. So that's part of the reason, I think, why the way we approached ADHD last time we talked about it touched so many people, to the point where, by a bit of a distance in recent weeks, it's the subject that when I'm out and about or signing my books or doing my stage shows, it's the subject which people have said to me most, thank you for doing that, please do more. Please do more on special educational needs in particular, but on ADHD and ADD and similar as well. Which is why I read Sheridan Smith's interviews today with such interest. Sheridan Smith, the supreme performer who's got a new big show coming to the West End soon, has revealed that she was diagnosed at the age of 42, or rather she is 42, and she has just been diagnosed. It happened about 2 weeks ago. She said it has helped her make sense of a lot of things. Two friends of mine, Sam Pittis and Katie Brethwick, formerly of this parish and now making beautiful music on Classic FM, do a podcast about ADHD because they too received diagnoses late in life. And last time we talked about it, we looked at the issue through the lens of both children and adults. Today I'm focusing exclusively on adults, on people who got their diagnosis after they had left full-time education. Because that seems to me to be a theme that's worthy of exclusive exploration today. We will, of course, return to classroom ADHD and childhood ADHD. But today, I want to know about you and what an adult diagnosis did. She has described it as helping her to make sense of her life, to make sense of a lot of things. She essentially has been given a name for things that she thought were oddities or failings or flaws. And the truth, of course, is that ADHD can cause restlessness. It can cause trouble concentrating, acting on impulse. But I think if you haven't got it, you can't quite ever get it. You need to hear from people who have. So 15 minutes after 11 is the time. As Sheridan Smith reveals the life-changing impact of an ADHD diagnosis at the age of 42, I want you to tell me how it's changed your life. And I want to nod to old me, or indeed old privileged men still banging on about how we just called it naughty in my day. I want, working on the presumption that some of them are listening, I want you to help them understand why they're wrong in perhaps a nicer way than I can manage these days, because that kind of character has done so much damage to my country. I find the whole attempt at compassion increasingly difficult. But why? Explain it in a way that makes it clear to somebody who thinks, oh, it's just a fancy new word for naughty. Why it is so much more than that, and so important. And therefore, an absolute contender for among the most important conversations that we have together. And I'm keeping a promise here to quite a few people who've been to see me recently, and it puts a smile on my face to think of that for two reasons. Number one, it's important. And number two, I've actually remembered to keep a promise.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
90 minutes after 11. I mentioned a couple of friends formerly of this parish, Sam Pittis and Katie Brethwick, whose podcast You're Wrong About ADHD is it's a thing of beauty. I've just seen a tweet from another former colleague of this parish and a lovely man, a truly lovely man, Ian Lee, who some of you will remember very, very fondly for his astonishingly creative and artistic and just genius approach to radio. He's tweeted, I got diagnosed at 47. It changed my life, helps me cope better day to day, but more importantly helps me make peace with the tornado of my past. I was actually told by a teacher. See, and just referencing back to something I said a few moments ago, that I was thick and naughty. Just imagine. And there it is. What difference does it make? The simple act of diagnosis. Ros is in Collierswood. Ros, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello. First time caller. I'm
Welcome.
A bit nervous.
It's only me. It's only me.
I was diagnosed last year, actually, at the age of 30.
Okay.
And it was only after having kids that it seemed necessary to actually follow a diagnosis.
Why?
Life became completely unmanageable.
Okay.
And it seems that that's quite a common theme in women, especially later in life.
Yes.
I'd had a lot of kind of rocky mental health paths before, and had a few kind of weird diagnoses that never really seemed to fit, and been on lots of different medications, and had a period where I'm just done with medication. I'm done with trying to find out what's wrong with me and kind of cracked on with life.
Yeah.
And then becoming a mum, the biggest shock was the emotional regulation and how that actually presented. And life just got so chaotic so quickly. And when I finally kind of sought out someone to do a private diagnosis, because the wait list was about 5 years in South West London, it has completely changed my life. I started medication quite quickly, and the change was dramatic.
Like what? Give me some highlights.
Everything is just so much clearer. I'm able to actually sit with my kids, which is really strange. I used to really struggle actually sitting down on the floor with babies. Because
you'd be distracted. You'd be
completely.
Right.
The only way I'd be able to spend quality time with them would be getting out the house. In the house, it would be everything was externally telling me, you need to do this, you need to go here, you need to call this person and do that and do this.
And then as soon as you did that, the voice would be telling you to do something else. It's not as if it was ever a destination. It was always just a distraction.
Completely. And then medication it doesn't take it all away, but for me, and it doesn't work for everybody, but for me, it's just let me take a little bit more of a breath before I actually act on needing to do things. I actually think, do I really need to do those things? But interestingly, in school, I was saying to your producer that I had a similar opinion growing up.
Oh, did
in
you?
The late 2000s. I used to think it was naughty little boys jumping around a classroom.
Yeah.
And then actually talking about my own school life, a lot of it was me not being able to concentrate, not following what was going on in class, really losing track of things, only clicking with certain teachers because they explained things certain ways. And I did really badly in school, and school was a really negative place. I think there's a statistic floating around.
It's a recurring theme, isn't it? It's a hugely recurring theme. Sorry, what's the statistic?
I think I don't know the exact figure, but it's something around children with ADHD experience over 50,000 more negative words than a normal child.
But I'm just looking at Ian being called sort of thick and lazy, or being, those are words that are probably modern teachers would be a little less likely to deploy, but they'll be using euphemistic versions of them, won't they? And you shouldn't be told stuff like that. Thick and naughty. Naughty probably still comes out, but hopefully thick doesn't. Ros, I mean, that's perfect. You've covered the whole thing, haven't you? You've gone from being that sort of slightly unthinking skeptic about even the reality of the condition to being a huge beneficiary of the diagnosis. What do people, briefly if you would, because there's loads of people keen to join in, but what do people around you say? Do people notice the change? Do they ever comment on it?
My husband is the one who actually pointed out the biggest changes. My medication dosage is split twice daily,
right? And
he will know if I've forgotten to take the afternoon dose.
Because he can tell that you're climbing the walls.
Yeah, and it just feels like this internal kind of buzz that that kind of comes back slightly. It's not. It sounds quite extreme, but it's not. You just kind of notice yourself doing things. But he's said our relationship has never been as calm as it has been before. It's always been it's just always been emotionally driven for myself.
You'll like this. You'll like the way... Sorry, go on.
No, that's all.
You'll like what Sheridan Smith said, I think. She said, I felt like a duck floating along fine but kicking like mad underneath. I know that sounds dramatic now, but the anxiety absolutely spiralled out of control. And then I think a bit like you, she got different diagnoses. She got bipolar and then medication for a year, second opinion. It's not bipolar. You've got generalised anxiety, anti-anxiety tablets, which became a nightmare because I needed more and more. It's so powerful for people like her to speak out, isn't it, I think?
Definitely. And I think it's also the more I still hear to this day so many people saying, oh, it's a bit of a fad at the moment, isn't it? Or like, doesn't everybody have that? And it just, like you said earlier, it just takes away. I've had 30 years of struggling with something I had no idea I was struggling with. And you kind of grieve the life that you could have had if you were diagnosed at 12 or 13.
Yes, I completely understand that. I hear that a lot, actually. And I mean, it doesn't, I think it touches the sides, but it doesn't by any stretch of the imagination go all the way. But the old adage, it's better late than never, does work. It's something my therapist said to me a lot when I said to her, I wish I'd worked all this stuff out years ago. Think how different my life could have been. And she said, yeah, but think how different it would be if you hadn't. Think about the road ahead at least as much as you're thinking about the road behind. And, you know, you're only 30. I can say that because I'm 52. You're only 30. You've got decades ahead of you and only 3 behind you. 26 after 11 is the time. Kat's in Shrewsbury. Kat, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I was just calling because I think that obviously a lot of the kind of talk about ADHD, especially in the past, but even recently with people that have been diagnosed in the media, is that it has still been talked about in terms of like boys being diagnosed. It's a naughty boys problem.
Naughty boys problems. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I think the thing is for me that I wasn't naughty at school, but the impact that it has on my life as an adult is sort of ADHD for women particularly is really unfortunate. Like the things that you're expected to be good at as a woman, housekeeping, child rearing, tidying up, cooking. I really struggle to do all of those things. Like my executive dysfunction kind of makes it almost impossible.
What's that phrase?
Executive dysfunction.
What does that mean?
Like, so it's sort of like a problem sort of prioritising tasks and sort of being able to sort of see the task as a whole. So when part of my diagnosis, I explained that I can't follow a recipe if it's more than a one-pot recipe because I can't prioritise and plan a task effectively. And one of the conversations I had with my husband was he was like, well, how do you cook? And I was like, well, I just follow the recipe, but I open the book and then I realise that I don't have all the things that I need. Yeah. Or I get to stage 5 and realise that I haven't, you know, sort of actually done some of the things.
What a brilliant explanation, because I don't have ADHD, therefore I can't understand that. How can you start the recipe before checking that you've got everything in it?
Well, because you just follow the points on the recipe, but you sort of don't realise until you've halfway through the text that it's mentioned something that's not in the list that you're supposed to have. And that's sort of my experience about a lot of things. But also then, you know, I think, oh God, like I'm a failure as an adult.
And you think it's part of who...
I'm not good at that stuff.
I mean, it is part of who you are, but you think that it is an irreparable part of who you are. What happens post-diagnosis? What happens when they give it a name?
Well, I think obviously that was a really big thing for me. I went from being a failure at being a mother and a woman to actually understanding that a lot of these things were because I live in a world that's not really made for people like me. And the sort of expectation on me, I was never meeting those things. And I remember, you know, like being a child, because I was diagnosed last year at 38 after nearly like 3 years on the waiting list. You know, and as a child, people were saying, oh, you know, she's so overwhelming and, oh, she just tried harder. And my entire life has been people telling me if I just tried harder, I would have been more successful. I would have achieved more things if only I'd put in more effort. When my mum went to parents' evening, I would dread her coming home because she would tell me that I should have tried harder. And I just remember thinking, but I'm trying so hard. But it was impossible to evidence the amount of mental effort that I was putting it in because it wasn't reflected in my ability to produce good work. And so, yeah, I think it's, in some ways, it's been really helpful to me to have a diagnosis, even at 38. But in some ways, there's been a process of grieving as well about the things that I could do.
Because you're looking at little Kat and thinking, I wish I could go back and tell you what's going on. I wish I could just look after you. Aren't you?
Yeah, and I think, sort of just having people, I think the saddest thing was obviously when you go through an adult diagnosis, you have to prove that you've had evidence of ADHD before the age of 12. And I found some of my school reports, and some of them are just heartbreaking. But the sentence that really stood out to me was, Kat relates well to adults, but struggles with her peers because of the things that she's interested in. They take over and she overwhelms them, and they find her overwhelming.
Oh, mate. Oh, that poor little girl.
But yeah, because I wasn't naughty, I was just
dysregulated.
Weird.
Is that the right word?
Yeah.
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 I can't believe something you said a couple of minutes ago when you said I went from feeling like a failure as a mother and a woman. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, but it's just, and I think that's where ADHD in women is just so misunderstood, and there needs to be a real conversation around that, because it's just the expectations that you have for you as a human when you are a woman, the tasks that people sort of expect for you in society, are things that you just are really, really hard.
A lot of people are messaging me to say you've managed, you and the last caller have managed to completely describe what they have been through. And of course, inevitably, you and Ros will also have made a lot of people think, crikey, they're talking about me. And it never crossed my mind I might have ADHD, but you're describing other people, not just as you describe, this, Kat, I think, as you describe yourself, many people see themselves, don't they? What was the clicker for you? I'm very, very, very late for the news, so you'll have to be brief. But no, don't be. It's my fault entirely. I'm in charge. I'm presenting the bloody programme.
I know, but I can't control the pace at which I speak.
No, it's nothing to do with that. I suddenly realised it happens all the time. It's always my fault. If Keith was nodding any more furiously, his head would fall off. What was the moment that made you think this isn't? I don't have to be like. What made you go and get a diagnosis, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I went back to uni to study to be a nurse.
Right.
And and obviously it was the sort of repeat of things that used to happen at school. And one of my lecturers was kind of just really supportive, and she kind of said, maybe do you think that, there's something else going on, that, because I was diagnosed with depression, that maybe you aren't depressed, and actually it's just this kind of process is not, like, that assessment process is not good for you. And I just, it was life-changing, because it suddenly made me realise that actually sort of maybe I wasn't just kind of broken or depressed or whatever, but actually that maybe just the way I experience the world is just maybe slightly different.
That's so well put. Thank you, Kat. Take care. And that's why Kate and Sam have called their podcast You're Wrong About ADHD, because it's a constant quest, essentially, to address prejudices, but also to recognise reality. And I don't think Kat and Ros could really have done a better job of establishing why I felt it was so important to return to this subject quite soon after the last time we did it, because we have barely touched the sides. Thomas Watts is here now with your rather late headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:37 is the time. He's very much on that list of people. I wonder whether we should ever give, the more desperate they are for attention, whether or not we should ever give them attention. But Rupert Murdoch's creature, Tucker Carlson, has been in Moscow recently, of course, quotes, interviewing, end quotes, Vladimir Putin. Carlson dispensed with by Fox News as part of that attempt to fend off the consequences of their lies about Dominion voting systems and Donald Trump's lies about the last American election. But I just mentioned that because of the news you just heard in Tom's bulletin about Alexei Navalny. It's odd to describe him as an opposition leader because he's been in prison for 3 or 4 years, but he is now dead. And the line issued by the Russian government or the Russian prison service On February the 16th, 2024, in Correctional Colony Number 3, convict A.A. Navalny felt unwell after a walk, almost immediately losing consciousness. The institution's medical workers immediately arrived and an emergency medical team was called. All necessary resuscitation measures were carried out, but they did not yield positive results. Emergency medical doctors confirmed the death of the convict. I won't say any more because we'll speak to my friend Bill Browder shortly, who is possibly the world's leading opponent and disseminator of opponent of Vladimir Putin, and I say the world's leading, the non-Russian disseminator of the truth about what goes on in Vladimir Putin's regime, even as people like Tucker Carlson, of course, who until relatively recently was a colleague, effectively, of everyone who works at The Sun, The Times, Talk TV, you name it. If you're part of the Murdoch empire, you are a former colleague of Tucker Carlson, and he's been in Moscow recently, essentially, I can't use that word on the radio, but cozying up, shall we say, to Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump, meanwhile, of course, outwardly supportive of Vladimir Putin, even as we learned today, one of his political opponents has died in prison, as we should say, at the very least, mysteriously. So we'll talk to Bill shortly, but before that, back to this huge conversation about late diagnosis, adult diagnosis, ADHD. And I don't think, properly speak to the sense of grieving for the person that you used to be, because it's not the same as what I went through with quite a bit of therapy that just helped me make sense of some of the things that had happened to me as a child and what they had done to me as an adult. But that's not a medical diagnosis. So that recurring theme from our callers about grieving effectively for the child who was called thick, or the child who was called naughty, or the sense of failure as a woman and a mother. It's an extraordinary conversation. It really is. The grief for what might have been, writes one texter, is just so hard to get past. Georgie's in Leeds. Georgie, what would you like to say?
Hi. Lovely to call in. I had my diagnosis just a few days ago.
Gosh.
And I'm 30 at the end of the year. I wasn't a naughty kid.
No.
I was very shy, but inside I always felt like I had this raging impulse to be outgoing and to be everyone's friend. And then it's only as I look back, I'm like, I obviously thought I wasn't good enough for, and I really relate to your previous caller. I can't remember her name, so I'm sorry, but ADHD. But I was definitely like, I've lost my thought. That's the perfect example.
Oh, don't worry. So I mean, you're literally in it. So they told you 2 days ago that this is what is going on. What made you go and seek a diagnosis?
Motherhood. I had 2 children under 2.
I think it was Roz. I think it was Roz's call in that case that resonated with you.
Definitely motherhood. And it's the juggle. It's everything. I studied psychotherapy, so I'd like to think I'm quite self-aware.
Yes.
I've been wrongly diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And I always felt like there was this gap, this hole that I couldn't fill. And I'd had a psychotherapist try to diagnose me with BPD relating to childhood trauma,
right,
etc. And now it's this. And as soon as my awareness, mainly through social media, everyone's got a bit of ADHD. There's so much out there now. But I think because the awareness is vamped up so much, that's what triggered my brain to go,
how interesting.
Oh my gosh,
Could
it's
be me.
that. And I've never felt so sure.
Really? You just thought it just can't be a coincidence. I've ticked so many of these boxes.
It was literally everything. And it was within the assessment. The health practitioner nurse was like, yeah, you've got ADHD. And I felt like it wasn't a surprise. It was a really weird diagnosis. It's not like being told something terrible. No. Like, I felt hope. I was like, so now I could be put on medication and be at my optimal self. And
what happens now? What happens now? What has happened now? What's the first thing that happens in that moment? What else does she say?
Yeah, so they're going to put me on a stimulant, which you wouldn't think someone who has hyperactivity would need more stimulation. But basically, my brain doesn't release dopamine the way a neurotypical brain might. So I don't get hits of, oh, that's met my need. I get hits of, that's not quite met it.
Then
I become...
I need more.
Yeah, and I become fixated on things. So like certain drinks or certain food is something that I fixate on, and I can't. It's like being on rails. I can't stop it.
Really?
And that's a lot of my life. It's to someone that doesn't have it, it's an impulsion. It's not a choice. It's literally like, for me, it's orange Lucozade at the minute.
Is it really? And you just have to have orange Lucozade every day?
I have to have a bottle every day.
The isotonic one, like the orange flavoured one, not
yeah. And it's insane because I would always describe myself as not an addictive person and quite a level-headed, rational person.
When do you get the medication?
Yeah, so I've been on antidepressants for about 6 years.
Right.
So they're giving me some medication that I've had to send off my blood pressure readings and things. So that's literally being processed now. And for all I mourn my previous self, because I used to be really interested in academia, but underperformed because there was no support there. Sorry, that's my child in the background.
Oh, well, we won't keep you from them for too long, I promise.
So, yeah.
Can we keep it? Can we, and listen, say no or say yes on the radio and then never return my calls again. But I'd love to just catch up with you every now and then and see when the medication starts working, what sort of difference it's making. Yeah,
I'd love that because I'm curious too. And like I was saying, for all I'm mourning for my past self, much like your other callers, I'm also celebrating for my future self because I've never seen what I'm going to be like in the future, as hasn't anyone else, unless you've got some gift. But I'm really excited that there is a medication and that if this raging part of me, that good old Lucozade and other things, can be tamed to some degree and can be... it can make sense for a change because I've just sort of gone with the flow and just accepted that.
That's such a lovely way of looking at it, isn't it? So as I tried to explain clumsily a minute ago, the road ahead. If you could let the road ahead be at least as important as the road behind, and it becomes less of a grieving process and more of an anticipation, perhaps, of what's to come.
Yeah, it's definitely the rainbow in the dark clouds because. Yeah, and the nurse said the medications can be transformative. They don't even recognise themselves. And
no guarantees, though, of course. People react differently. So fingers crossed.
Like anything, it does take some adjusting, like any medication. But also, even if you're not going down the medication route, just understanding the nature of the beast is a massive part of it.
It must be, mustn't it? It absolutely must be. Just to know, it's more than just. I thought that Kat's comment of having felt like a failure as a woman and a mother was absolutely traffic stopping, wasn't it? And to realise that it's not that, it's something else. It's something that can be addressed and can be fixed even. Can we do that then? Is that all right? Should we catch up?
Yeah, it'd be great.
All right, stay on the line and have a word with one of my colleagues, probably be Eleanor, I think, and we'll try and just because I wonder if don't get cross with me, but if next time we speak to you, I wonder if you will not forget the name of the person you were referring to and the point that you wanted to make at the beginning of this conversation. It'd be really interesting to see. It really will. And I wish you and yours all the absolute best. I really do. Thank you, Georgie. Can we deal with Georgie now? 11:46 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I'll tell you again, I mentioned to you that the switchboard is not the driving force of this programme. Some of the best conversations we've ever had have been on hour-long topics where we've only had 4 calls. But those 4 calls have been people so intimately involved in the story that we're talking about that they change our understanding of everything related to the issue that's under discussion. And similarly, if you want to make the phones ring without making interesting radio, you can just talk about, I don't know, speed cameras or parking tickets and boom, everyone's ringing in. But on a subject like this, when you're talking about something new and you see that the volume of people wanting to contribute is extraordinary, then you realise you're in the foothills of another major social moment, and particularly for young mums. Isn't that interesting? How a sort of self-selecting sample this morning has emerged from young mums, and that phrase of Kat's feeling like a failure as a woman and a mother, and then discovering that actually this is not, well, it's neither necessary nor permanent, that feeling. Bill Browder will be joining us next to talk about the reported death of the Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny in correctional colony number 3 in Russia.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:52 and it is to Bill Browder we turn next with, I suppose, Bill, we have to say the unexpected but entirely predictable death of Alexei Navalny in a Russian jail.
Yep.
Oh, phone line's a bit sticky. We'll try and fix that shortly. I don't know whether it's a delay at our end or at his end. And given that the subject that's under discussion at the moment is so personal and indeed so serious, I don't think I'll go to a caller. I'll return to Bill Browder, and I'm just reflecting, Bill, upon the fact that it is both unexpected and entirely predictable. Remind us just how sharp a thorn Alexei had been in Vladimir Putin's side.
Well, Alexei Navalny was the one of the most courageous people in Russia. He was ready to call out Putin for who he is, which is a criminal, a thief, and a murderer. And he made movies about Putin. He exposed Putin's illicit gains and wealth, and all of Putin's cronies. And for that, Putin tried to kill him with chemical nerve agent Novichok back in 2020. And here we are now, 2024. They finally got him. The first attempt to kill him didn't succeed, and so we don't know exactly what happened. But he's, according to Russian prison reports, he's no longer alive.
And you're in little doubt that will be as a consequence of other people's actions rather than anything remotely resembling natural causes.
He was an extremely healthy, vital young man before the poisoning attempt, and how the Russian government decides to explain it, it's all obvious to me and everybody else that Alexei Navalny was killed by Putin.
How much influence or impact does the broader global picture have upon the audacity that Putin and his cronies would deploy in circumstances like this? By which I suppose I mean, if Putin's pariah status was even more firmly established, would he be less likely to be sanctioning or ordering this kind of thing?
Well, I think that the more Putin becomes sort of Kim Jong-un-like, yes, the more he doesn't care what people think. And so as he becomes isolated, as he becomes a pariah, nothing matters. But I don't think this is directed towards the international audience. I think this is directed towards the Russian audience, which is to say that he's anybody who stands up to him will be killed. Putin killed Yevgeny Prigozhin, and now he's killed Alexei Navalny. And the message is that this is what a dictator does. That it's a totalitarian regime, and messages to everybody: don't stand up to Putin because this is what happens to you.
Yeah, well, I had John Sweeney on the programme earlier this week for slightly different reasons, and he ran through a list of opposition figures who have literally been murdered in plain sight by Vladimir Putin. For people who don't know, your commitment to exposing and ideally sanctioning Vladimir Putin also began with a murder in a Russian prison cell, didn't it?
Yeah, indeed. So one of the reasons that I'm so knowledgeable about Putin's crimes is that he killed my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. Sergei was 37 years old and was tortured to death in a Russian prison for uncovering a massive government corruption scheme in which Putin was a beneficiary. He was killed in 2009, and I've been on a mission to expose the people who killed him. And one of the people who got involved in helping me with this mission was Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny was very much a part of the Justice for Sergei Magnitsky campaign, and now Alexei Navalny is killed himself, and it's all very, very horrible and really just shows Putin's true colors in the most clear and dramatic way.
I'm sure also like you, I find my thoughts turning very, very reluctantly and very sadly to Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's also in a Russian jail, also someone who's worked closely with you on the Magnitsky sanctions, and also a deep opponent of Vladimir Putin. A word, if you would, because you know both of these men, or rather you knew Alexei and you know Vladimir well. Why don't they stay in the West, agitating from the West? Why do they feel this need to return to Russia? And despite the obvious, and today the crystal clear risks, not just to their safety, but to their lives?
Well, it's the obvious question, which I've asked Vladimir Kara-Murza before he went back to Russia. I said, why would you do that? You could be more effective outside than inside in a prison. And the answer that I got from Vladimir, and I'm pretty sure this was the same with Navalny, was that he's a politician, that he's a patriot, that this is his country, and that it's his duty to stand up inside his own country. And that may be idealistic and maybe stubborn, but it's a different mentality than we can understand. And I think probably the only way to stand up against dictators is to do that, but there's a good chance you're going to lose your life in the process.
And finally, Bill, a word, if you would, on what happens now. I mean, some people perhaps would be expecting some form of investigation, that there would be some hope that the truth might emerge. You know from bitter experience that that's unlikely, but will we see any more than this announcement that a prisoner convict, A.A. Navalny, in correctional colony number 3 lost consciousness after going for a walk? Will that be the end of the story as far as the Russian authorities are concerned?
This will be the end. There will be an official cover-up that says that he died of natural causes, that it was nobody's fault. That it was unfortunate that people do die in prison, and that's what the fate of Alexei Navalny will be. They may even have a medical exam, which will be with fake results to support their assertion that he died of natural causes. And at the same time, Putin will glare at everybody with a clear understanding that he did it, and he likes to play out of both sides of his mouth. He wants everyone to know that he kills people. And at the same time, he wants no official responsibility, and the best way of doing that is just to fake the whole thing.
While I have you, what did you make of Tucker Carlson's trip to Moscow this week?
Well, I mean, it looks particularly bad in light of them killing their most prominent opposition politician. Tucker Carlson is if he uttered the same words about Vladimir Putin that he does about President Biden, he would also be dead in Russia right now.
Bill Browder, many thanks. I'm sorry that we find ourselves speaking once again in such grim circumstances, but few people better qualified to reflect upon and explain the significance of the murder in a Russian jail, I think, I will say, of Alexei Navalny. Our thoughts to his friends and family. It's coming up to 12 noon. Given that rather unexpected diversion, we will take a couple more calls on the late diagnosis, adult diagnosis ADHD conversation that is so extraordinary and so, I think we'd have to say, oversubscribed. But on a considerably lighter note, given that it is Friday, I'm also drawn to the battle of the dating apps. I'm so old that I have attended weddings where the bride and groom didn't want anyone in the room to know that they'd met on a dating app. I bet youngsters can't even believe that.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 12. Before we return to that extraordinary conversation, a quick word for anyone who, like me, has wondered precisely what the regulations or the red tape that Jacob Rees-Mogg was keen to get rid of, or precisely what the laws were that he and his ilk were so keen to diverge from. Environment reporter at The Guardian, Helena Horton, has been having a look at some government papers that provide something of a clue. You can expect soon workers in the UK to be less protected from hazardous chemicals than workers in the EU. On what possible planet is it a good idea to reduce the protections that workers have from hazardous chemicals? But remember, everybody knew exactly what they were voting for, and it's all worth it. Whatever it is, the prize, it's all worth it. The economic damage is worth it, because now your employer can insist that you work with chemicals that you wouldn't be allowed to work with if you lived in France. That's just coming up on the horizon now. So next time you hear them talking about diverging from European laws or getting rid of red tape, just do me a favour, please, and ask them for specifics. I grant you this is more for journalists than it is for punters, but good God, how hard can it be to ask for examples? Kay Burley did it the other day when that weirdo was talking about BBC bias, and she said, could you give us some examples, please? And the culture minister sort of went, well, Lots of people think it's biased. You see, yeah. Some people think I'm bonkers. No, lots of people think I'm biased. Lots of people think the BBC is biased. Well, could you give us some examples? So here it is. We need to get rid of these regulations. Could you give us some examples? Do you know that's how I cut my teeth on Brexit? Long before the referendum even. We do the occasional phone-in on the European Union, why we should leave, and people would ring in, we've got to get rid of all the regulations. And I'd say, what regulations? And that's what would happen, that noise there. Or someone would say, well, my brother-in-law, he can't export lawnmowers to Poland because of directive... I'm not clarifying that I'm calling Kay Burley a weirdo, although I reserve the right to do so. I was calling Lucy Fraser a weirdo in the context of that, lest anyone cares. But my brother-in-law can't export lawnmowers to Poland because of EU directives. And I said, does your brother-in-law export lawnmowers to Poland? No, he's a greengrocer. But if he wanted to export lawnmowers to Poland, he wouldn't be allowed to because of EU rules. I said, well, which rule is that then? All of them. I mean, that's how it started. That's how my interest in the European Union, or rather in Euroscepticism, started, because everybody that was describing themselves as a Eurosceptic would fall apart after being asked one or possibly two questions. But still people don't ask those questions. So today we find ourselves presumably celebrating the news that workers in the UK will be less protected from hazardous chemicals than workers in the EU. Because, frankly, who the hell wants to be protected? It's probably woke, isn't it? So, thank God for that. It's so woke to protect workers from hazardous chemicals. The sooner we can all be neck deep in hydrochloric acid, the better for everybody concerned. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. Back to ADHD. Sorry for the distractions. Kate's in Bethnal Green. Katie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
lovely to speak to you guys again.
Likewise.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to say it was really refreshing to hear Kat. I think it was Georgie and Roz. And they have kind of covered a lot of what I wanted to say as well. But I was diagnosed at the age of 30, December 2022. It was following like a series of very traumatic experience, and it was kind of a happy accident. And it was about 12 months into the therapy where my therapist just said, like, has no one ever at any point in your childhood, like any caregivers, even clocked this or mentioned ADHD?
And you said no.
I'd like, no, of course not. Of course not. But it kind of, everything just made sense. And when I started speaking to friends about it, my therapist was like 99% sure you've got it. They were like, yeah, of course you do. Like, how are you just learning this now? We've known this for years.
So what changed? What changed when you got the diagnosis?
Well, it allowed me to give myself permission to accept the ways that I've dealt with the trauma that I'd had. Again, oversharing is a massive part of ADHD, and I know it's going to come out at some point, but, I've dealt with suicide, and I've dealt with sexual assault.
Okay.
And I also dealt with a very awful car crash that I was first responder to. So I had some really, really bad trauma experiences, and the way that I dealt with them was because I didn't realise my brain was constantly searching for serotonin and dopamine, I was putting myself in reckless and impulsive and dangerous situations.
Right.
So I was self-medicating in whichever way I could find, and still to this day, I'm somewhat doing that only because I'm still waiting to get my ADHD medication. But it just gave myself permission to accept that the way that I dealt with those tragedies wasn't just because I'm a bad person, and that it was genuinely because my brain was not...
letting you be kinder to yourself, then.
Yeah, that's it. My internal conversations before this diagnosis were horrible, horrible, horrible things I said to myself. And since having the diagnosis, those horrible comments, they still creep in every now and then, don't get me wrong, but the louder side, the side that understands now where that's coming from, is so much louder. And even though I've got a long way to go, and as I say, I still do slip up from time to time.
But you're facing in a different direction, aren't you? That's come across from every caller. I'm so happy for you. And for everybody who's rung in today, what did the letters ADHD mean to you 20 years ago or 10 years ago?
Naughty little schoolboy kids, that's all it was. It was only men, it was only boys, it was always just lazy. And I think Nick Ferrari actually said something the other day which just made my blood boil about being at lazy kids. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to call in, to be honest with you, is the fact that now we're getting more, now we understand more about ADHD and we get more awareness for it. we're now getting, those that hate the wokerati trying to go and throw this narrative in that it's made up and it's not real. And as I say, I'm a survivor of sexual assault, so I already battle with blaming myself every day for what I've done. So when I got the diagnosis, I felt so freed, and now all I'm seeing is this narrative about how it's made up, and it's starting to make me question myself again. And so you bring this conversation to light today has meant an awful lot to me, because just as you're now shining light on it and giving us voices and actually hearing, like, as I say, like Kat, Georgie and Roz speak about what they spoke about, it just gives me that little bit of like, no, Kate, you're okay. Like,
you hang in there. Hang in there.
Ignore those noises. Oh. Like, there are people, this is real. And I think you've done a really good job today for sharing that. So thank you.
I'm just answering the phone, Kate. Well, I'm not even doing that, actually. That's Roxy and Eleanor. I'm just speaking to the people to whom they have answered the phone. But you're right. I think it is important to be clear-eyed and honest about these things, and to resist any temptation towards knee-jerk provocations that will be deeply, deeply offensive to people who, in the case of Katie, obviously, and others, are already suffering quite enough. Thank you very much. Katie, take care. And I think this will be an hour, give or take, because we spoke to Bill about the murder of Alexei Navalny. I think this will be an hour in which we haven't spoken to a single bloke, which is mad when you think about the frequency and the ease with which people do talk about ADHD as being a naughty boy's condition, or it affects boys as well. Good God, it does, and we'll definitely have those conversations. And it affects grown men, and grown men have late diagnoses as well, and we've spoken to them and about them. But something happened today unexpectedly as it went inside, possibly because of Sheridan Smith being a 42-year-old woman who got diagnosed a fortnight ago, which is what prompted this conversation. But there it is. There it is, just all women in their 30s and 40s, I think, even sort of zoning in on the age group as well. And this stuff is life-changing. And if you haven't checked out Katie and Sam's podcast, you're wrong about ADHD, and you want more, you want to hear more and learn more about this issue, especially if it is you that we're talking about, then I could not recommend it more highly. It's all available on the Global Player. Claire is in Manchester. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you for bringing attention to late diagnosed ADHD people, because there is such misunderstanding out there. It is honestly unreal. I'm now 43 years old. I was diagnosed 2.5 years ago at the grand old age of 40. When they say that life begins at 40, I don't think this was what they meant. But by the same token,
no, I'm pretty sure they didn't, as it goes.
I'm not objecting. So when I got diagnosed, basically, I got told 3 things. 1, yes, it's real. 2, yes, you've got it. 3, take these pills, you will have a happier life. Now, before I started taking any medication whatsoever, I made a point of, looking into it and all the rest of it, because I'm not just going to take medication without, figuring out what the side effects, the potential negative impacts are, as well as the benefits. And I just won't really take medicine for anything unless I can avoid it, because I'm just one of those people. But I then started to investigate a little bit about ADHD, because you get told so little about it. I mean, those are literally the 3 things that I got told. That was it. And I started to investigate things, which is a fairly common thing apparently after you get diagnosed. And then, of course, we've got this wonderful thing most of the time that's called hyperfocus. So then you end up falling down a bit of a rabbit hole and investigating stuff to do with ADHD, and things that you could not even begin to imagine could possibly be related to ADHD are related to ADHD. And it just starts to explain so many daft little random things in your life, as well as some really, really, really serious things.
So if it doesn't make sense and you wish you didn't do it, it might well be linked to ADHD.
In some ways, yes. Like for example, some people have issues with object permanence, really struggle with replying to text messages that friends have sent them. They don't mean to ignore them, they just struggle with it. Right. Daft as it sounds, I'm not one of those people. Also, taking the washing out of the dryer, putting it in the tumble dryer or hanging it up, then remembering to take it out of the tumble dryer, literally out of sight for some people is out of mind in any capacity you can imagine that in. That's not what affects me. The worst thing for me is probably something that's called time blindness. So our brains literally do not understand how time works, which sounds crazy. So if you imagine the world is basically on a timeline, our comprehension of where we are on that timeline is horrendous. And also our ability to understand how long something would take. So, for example, if somebody gives me a piece of work to do and asks me how long it takes at work,
I would struggle to say whether it's going to take me 30 minutes or 3 hours or 3 days. And that's not me being, even though I'm academically incredibly bright, I did really, really well at school. I went to university. I've got a degree from a Redbrook University, a master's degree from a Redbrook University. You know, I'm not the stereotypical sort of naughty child who can't sit still that most people would think of when they think of ADHD. And there are many other people out there like that. It's just, there are ways that it affects, and they're not necessarily the stereotypical ones. For most women, there are 3 different types of ADHD. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if anyone's explicitly said this on the show.
Go on.
There's what used to be known as stereotypical ADHD, you know, naughty boy syndrome. It's now known as ADHD type 1 hyperactive. There's ADHD type 2 inattentive, which is the type that I and most women have. It's relatively women to have the hyperactive version.
Right.
And then there's a combined type, which is type 3, which is basically, I think of it as like the greatest hits of type 1 and type 2. So you're a little bit too hyperactive to be completely inattentive and a bit too inattentive to be completely hyperactive. But you've got a sort of combination of all 3 of them. But some of the really, really serious stuff that I've investigated, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to say this, just because I guarantee even people who've been investigating this probably won't know this, is stuff to do with women's health and hormones. So, for example, I'm not sure if you're aware that estrogen is actually implicitly, very much implicit in the reuptake and the synthesis of estrogen and norepinephrine, which are the two... basically, they're the 2 neurotransmitters that people who've got ADHD lack. So when you hit key points in your life, such as the menopause, the perimenopause, such as when you're going through puberty, things like that, things start to go off the rails very much for certain women who've got ADHD. So you hear things about, for example, when a woman reaches perimenopause.
I'm going to say this very sensitively, Claire, given what you just told me about keeping track of time, but we are about to run out.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so basically,
no, it's not. It's not. I mean, it's not you losing track of time. It's me forgetting to look at the clock, is what it is. But we are pretty much up to the limit. So just a sentence or 2 more, if you could.
Okay, no problem. Basically, look up perimenopause. Look up estrogen, norepinephrine, and dopamine reuptake.
And all of the links. I mean, I find it utterly unsurprising. I didn't know much about it, if anything. But of course, it's probably linked to the fact that not that long ago, any women displaying certain behaviours would be described as hysterical, which is linked immediately back to gynecology. So, I think that there probably is some sense of links not only being properly understood, but being misdescribed and indeed maligned. Claire, thank you. You were brilliant. You were absolutely brilliant. Every caller on this subject has been absolutely brilliant. It's a privilege to learn from you.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 12, and I promise we'll come back to that. But what I want to do is do it regularly rather than for 2 hours today. But that means I have to apologise to everybody who was hoping to talk about that issue as well. Particularly a bloke who went to my school, actually, albeit quite a few years before me, and was constantly labelled as lazy and naughty. I have to think back, actually, before we move on to the next subject, which is altogether lighter-hearted. Just think back, if it wasn't you, who was it at school, do you think, that probably would have benefited enormously from this sort of understanding and diagnosis, and where their life might have gone if there had been interventions at that stage? I just got a very moving bunch of tweets from one of the people I was talking to you about, actually, one of the people who had stopped me recently and out and about to say thanks for covering this subject, and the difference that early diagnosis could make is obviously immeasurable and unknowable, but almost certainly immense. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. So I read something once about Netflix, and it made me think about Tinder. I am of an age where I have never been on a dating app. Do you know, I don't think I've even looked at one as a tourist to sort of find out what all the fuss is about. But I certainly never used one as a consumer. And for my generation, it was still 15 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, there was still a little bit of stigma attached to it. So I have attended 2 weddings where I knew that the bride and groom were had met on a dating app, had met online, and nobody else, or rather, most people in the room, most people at the wedding didn't. So only the closest friends of the bride or family of the bride and groom knew that they'd met on because or you just say we met in a bar, and no one's ever going to know any different. And in a way, you did meet in a bar because you met on a dating app and arranged to meet in a bar. So you could. The difference being, of course, that some people, myself included, would find it almost inconceivably impossible to march up to a complete stranger in a public space and try to, quotes, chat them up, end quotes. So I'm fascinated by that. But the thing I read about Netflix that really struck me, because I was confused why they axed series sometimes before they'd finished. Even some of their most popular series, a couple of years later, get axed, and you get the things online, like the petitions, and please don't axe this. But, of course, Netflix's model for a long time depended, and probably still depends on, securing new subscribers. You know, it's infinite growth again, isn't it? You've got to keep growing. You can't just consolidate where you are, be happy with that business, and harvest the profits back into the business and share some of them up amongst us. So because Netflix was dedicated to securing new subscribers, and you're not going to get new subscribers for Series 4 of a smash hit, even if Series 1 and 2 were two of the most successful things that Netflix had ever carried, they axe that series to start a new one in the hope that it gathers a momentum and gets word of mouth, which means new people go and sign on. So most of the big shows, the ones that go the distance, go back to the box sets. It's why you now have bidding wars almost, and one platform will resurrect another show from another platform because the other platform had got rid of it. But why would another platform do that? Answer simple, because they'll get new subscribers by picking up a show that's been dropped by the platform that launched it. They're not going to get any new subscribers by putting on Series 4. Do you see? But if you love it and you want to watch Series 4, you're going to sign up to the new platform without leaving the old platform, because the old platform's got lots of stuff you still like and is launching its own new shows as well. And that's the end of my TED Talk. So how does this apply to dating apps? I hear you wonder. Well, when I read that about Netflix, right, I found myself wondering whether Tinder had the same problem. Because the worst thing imaginable, if you're a shareholder in Tinder, is for people to get together forever. So it's almost turned into a pop song, that. What's Together Forever? What's that for? Together Forever and giving my heart away and I still love you. Did I get the lyrics right? I never get the lyrics right. I either get the tune right or the words right. Never both at the same time. It's like Eric Morecambe and Andre Previn, but without the laughs. I thought, well, surely this is terrible for Tinder. Because as I understand it, Tinder depends upon you constantly swiping and you constantly being in the mix, as it were, and you constantly being on the lookout. And that is why a headline in the Daily Telegraph, of all places today, actually stopped me in my tracks. Because it said, Tinder accused of, quotes, addicting users instead of finding them love. And not for the first time in my life, I thought, if only you could somehow buy shares in ideas. Because I had this idea about 5 years ago that Tinder surely needs people to carry on rather than settling down and finding someone in love. So, there'd be some publicity seeking involved here because the lawsuit was filed on Valentine's Day, and the parent company of Tinder, Match, has been accused of prioritising profits over relationship goals. Spokesman for Match has said the lawsuit is ridiculous and has rejected claims of negligence and false marketing. So it will be interesting to see how it unfolds. But that notion of being designed to be addictive rather than being, as they have claimed in some of their marketing literature, designed to be deleted, intrigues me. It intrigues me deeply. And the question, I think, for you is quite straightforward on this. Is it specific to Tinder? But if people aren't really... Are you using Tinder? What is it? There's so many now. It's so impossible to keep up with. I hear of Hinge quite... Is Hinge a thing? I hear of Hinge quite often. People seem to use Hinge. Bumble? Hinge, stop saying weird words in my ear, because I can't check that any of the shush. I can't. Alpin? There's not one called Alpin, Keith. What are you talking about? Happen. Is that a Yorkshire one? Is that for people that happen? I've got a date. I've gone to a pub. Happen. Really? There's one called Happen? Oh, that's fantastic. So, what's the difference between a good one and a bad one? Do you see what I mean? And if you were a user of Tinder, and there must be loads of people listening who were, if you were a user of Tinder, do you think it was actually encouraging you to carry on playing rather than helping you settle down with your true love? I love this question. I hope you do too. So, I mean, I'd start with that, shall we? We'll start with that. So, as a Tinder veteran, did you actually find love when you came off it? Do you think it's possible? Because I always forget the correct phrase, but the fixed odds betting terminals, there's a whole field of academic study dedicated to discovering the optimum levels of exploitation of consumer. So if it paid out a little bit more, then you'd probably say, all right, that's enough, I'm walking away. If it paid out a little bit less, then you'd probably say, all right, that's enough, I'm not putting in any more money. But if it pays out precisely the right amount, then you will carry on putting your money in again and again and again and again. I've written about it in How to Be Right, but I can never remember the correct academic phrase to describe it. And then, of course, you factor in the bells and whistles, the things on the actual machines that tempt you into playing in the first place. That's half the battle, and the other half of the battle is to get you playing for as long as you possibly can. And it seems to me quite logical that Tinder, which would rely on advertising for its income, doesn't want you to stop using Tinder. But I mean, that is not something I have any experience of whatsoever, but it is something that is central to this lawsuit that dropped on Valentine's Day in America. So you tell me, 0345 6060 973, did you or do you think that Tinder actually encourages promiscuity more than it facilitates settling down? Or not even promiscuity, but multiple dating. You carry on dating. Was that a film? Did they ever get around to making that? Oh, matron. You carry on dating because of the technology that you signed up to in the first place because you wanted to settle down. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Tim Humphrey has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. I love it when a plan comes together, albeit that one swallow does not a summer make. James writes this texter, I've been off and on dating apps for close to 10 years, and this week I've deleted them all for this exact reason. The model is absolutely geared to prioritise keeping people on the apps rather than helping them find happiness. And frankly, the mental turmoil and self-criticism that it creates is no longer worth it for me. So this would mean, if I were to take my slightly highfalutin theory even further, this would mean that the people who got together early doors, people whose weddings I went to, they're like your Series 1 and Series 2 of a TV classic. But the model so they all go out and say these things are great, but they're not on them anymore because they got married. And that's rubbish from the point of view of the business and the shareholder. So they're like Series 1 and Series 2 of the box set. And in fact, they would be axed at Series 3 or 4 because you need new people to come in. And as the model evolves and the business grows, you put more and more effort into making sure that people don't leave than you do into creating the word of mouth of people getting together. So there's a tipping point at which you don't need the word of mouth that I met my partner online anymore. All you need is you sign up too. You will find true love. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud. And now it's your turn. Ben's in Stafford. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Before I get into it, I just want to say that I saw you in Wolverhampton earlier this month, and it was absolutely fantastic.
Oh, thanks, mate. It was a great night, wasn't it?
I saw you after the show, and I didn't have much to say because I was a bit nervous, but it was great to meet you.
Thank you, Ben. Do you know
that now, hopefully?
The two people on stage that night, it's just been announced that one of them is going into the House of Lords.
Ayesha Hazarika?
Yeah. Well done.
Oh, wow.
I know. Isn't that incredible? I had no idea, but it obviously isn't me. Anyway, back to the dating apps. What do you want to say?
Yes, so dating apps have been around for over a decade now, so we're finally starting to get the data on the effects that they're causing. And one of the things is that 80% of the women are only interested in about 5% of the men. And those men tend to be the men that they photograph well, they've got good genetics. Usually they're 6 foot tall.
Yeah.
They have photos that show that they've got status symbols, like an expensive car or things like that.
Where do these numbers come from? Where do you get those figures from, if you don't mind me asking?
Okay, so there's a book called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution that refers to this as well. And there's another book by a certain Jordan Peterson, which I have read in the past, which also refers to it.
Okay.
I know.
I don't want to be rude, but it sounded... I don't like the word incel, but it did sound a little bit incel the way you described it there, because I know... probably 50% of my social circle who got together on these apps, and absolutely none of the men involved would fit into the category that you've just described. In fact, they'd rather cut their own arm off than be photographed with a status symbol like a car. So let's park the statistics, if we may, and talk exclusively about your experiences.
Okay, so I've been on a dating app for nearly 2 years now, and I think one of the things for me is because I'm only 5'4" tall. And so for a lot of women, that's going to be a bit of a non-starter anyway.
Yeah, well, is it? I suppose it is, because they're not meeting you and you're not having the chance to, what I used to call, have a long run-up, which is why, I could never have operated. I'm 6 foot and I wouldn't have worked on a dating app either, Ben, because I need to get a bit of chatter going. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing. You're boiled down to
exactly
things like height, the degree to which you're educated, and the dating apps are designed so that you can filter people out that don't meet your expectation, even though in the real world you might see them and you see something different about them when you see them in reality. There's something else. There's another je ne sais quoi that you can't describe about them that warms you to them.
You're absolutely right. You really are. So you're not really in the category I'm talking about. You're disillusioned with dating apps for different reasons. You're not someone who is dating endlessly and not settling down because the algorithm or the business model is designed to keep you on there rather than to actually find you a life partner.
Well, there probably are guys that can use them that way. Like I said, if they're in that, that top 5% or they're the best looking or whatever, they don't need to settle for anybody, because women kind of fall at their feet to get to know them, to date them and more.
You put me in a slightly uncomfortable situation, especially because you said such lovely things at the outset. But don't read any more of those books. I think you're right to think that being not very tall probably has an impact upon first impressions. Of course it does. But these men you think exist don't. They don't exist. There are a couple of weirdos, often on trial or on sex trafficking charges, who pretend that they can sell secrets of seduction. But without being too rude, the autonomous, strong women are not going to want to go out with men like that, or men who followed their dating tips. The kind of woman you deserve, Ben, will see past your height. And you wouldn't want to be with her if she was truly looking for a man with a Ferrari and no morals. So you oddly, given the last hour of conversation that we had, I think you need to be a bit kinder to yourself, mate. I think you sound like you'd be a catch for a young woman, and you don't need to define the fact that things aren't happening for you in the way that you might want. And to be fair, in my 20s, I often felt like that. You don't need to define that by almost feeling that you're being squeezed out of the picture by a largely mythical constituency of men who treat women appallingly, drive fast cars, and largely don't exist. So I don't think these books are... No, okay.
I'm not a follower of Andrew Tate, by the way. I'm just saying that with any hierarchy, there will be people that rise to the top, and
I don't think love works like that, really, to be honest with you. And it's easy for me to say, but I'm no oil painting, and the idea that everything is defined solely. I mean, dating apps might help create the idea that if you don't have a nice profile, or you don't have a seductive profile, or an impressive or a high status profile, then you won't get as many clicks. But I don't think that these books are helping you at all. I don't think if you're really looking for love, words like hierarchy are helpful. I really don't, mate. I think it's a good way of making an awful lot of money and getting famous, while also, in the case of one of the writers you've mentioned, having a personal life that's a bloody car crash.
Yeah, maybe I guess it does sound a bit clinical the way I'm describing it. Yeah.
It does. And I don't know what the alternative is, though, for your generation. Really, for me, it was always work. Where you get that opportunity to sit next to someone that you fancy, or to make sure that you can go up to them in the pub after work. But listen, I could be horribly wrong, and I hope you don't feel patronised, but I don't think that's going to help. If you could get... If you woke up tomorrow and you were 6'4" and you had a Ferrari in the drive, you'd still be you, and it's you that you want someone to fall in love with, not your height or your car or your status. It's you, and if you look after you, you immediately become more attractive, and the happier you are with you, the happier you can make someone else. But I feel every one of my 52 years as I try and give out that advice to a 28-year-old mate. Look after yourself, seriously. Chris is in Horsham. Chris, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. This really spoke to me because I spent the last 10 years on dating apps, first in New York and then recently here in England.
Gosh.
And after those 10 years, I actually got to a point where I realized that dating apps were a bit like dating someone who has the worst best mate in the world. That best mate that's always dragging them off on holidays and saying, oh, what about this guy here? Yeah. Oh, well, what about that? And what about this guy? And just constantly doing everything they can to sabotage this very delicate thing that happens when you're in the early throes of, the art of the possible. Yes. What could this possibly be? A human is a very complex thing. And you're trying to make a judgment, but you're constantly being thrown in other directions.
It's like being in the sweet shop, I imagine, in some senses.
Yes.
And either you're in a sweet shop and you can't try any of the sweets, which is perhaps a little bit like what Ben sounded like, and that's horrible. Yeah. Or you're in the sweet shop and you keep thinking, oh, I've had that sweet and now I'll try another one. And that's pretty awful as well after a while.
Well, James, I can tell you, I'm 6'1" and a former model, so I didn't have any issues with, people talking to me,
Sure.
but I had major issues with people continuing the conversation and not getting sidetracked. So I don't think that stuff is necessarily, the biggest problem.
No.
However, I do say I was always horrified when I'm swiping and on profiles, women will say, no short men, please, no short men, please. I'm 5'11" with heels, and I was always horrified because I thought, well, if you're a man and you say no flat-chested women, please, you would get destroyed.
And rightly so it is. It is a sort of a soft permitted prejudice, isn't it? So have you knocked it on the head now? Because obviously if you've been on there 10 years looking for a partner, then you are not a very good advertisement for these sites.
Well, I decided straight away that Tinder was a total no-go because I thought Tinder was the absolute worst algo, and it was blatantly the worst algo.
How interesting.
So I moved on to Bumble.
Right.
But even with Bumble, I felt like there were, women who'd been on it for months and months and months, and every time I went back in to try it, there was still the same people there in the infinite scroll of Netflix or something like that. And it was actually someone who I got together with who reached out to me when a relationship broke down, and we finally sort of connected in a really great way, and that was last year.
And you're still together.
Strong, engaged, all of it.
You go. You see, but saying that, I haven't. Two things I'll thank you for. One is the use of the word algo, which I haven't come across before. And the second is I was going to suggest that you tried Appen. You could meet a lovely girl from Leeds. Sorry, that's quite a niche bit of humour, isn't it? But that's what I thought Keith said in my ear. I thought there was one called Appen, just for Yorkshire dating. There should be. I'd tell you what, copyright that now. We could make our fortunes.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. I shall rattle through these because I think Ben deserves it. This is from Anne, who says, tell your caller, Ben, he's got a lovely voice and sounds great. There's definitely a woman out there for him. Forget height. You've got so much going for you, says Anne. Angela says, I'm 5'9". I've dated 2 men shorter than me. Tell that lovely chap, who really does sound lovely, to find some local salsa lessons in a club or a bar, not in a dance studio, and he will start meeting women and dancing. And Michelle says, James is totally right about that guy who's 5'4". He needs to put the self-help books down and just work on being himself and liking who he is. Some hobbies would help, and he'll find the love of his life who loves him for himself in no time. And here's another one. Please tell Ben I'm 5'4" and my husband is 5'1". I was lucky to have him, and every single one of my friends fancied the pants off him. That's no joke. He's never been embarrassed by his height, full of confidence, great sportsman, all-round beautiful soul. Height isn't as important to women as men make each other believe. And I would add to that one of my very, very best friends in the whole wide world, who I lost during COVID, was a tiny little fella. And one of the things that our mate said at the funeral was he said, for a little fella, he's left a massive hole. And that I think probably best encapsulates and it must be hurtful to see these lines on sites, but it must be, that encapsulates the irrelevance of it, really, once proper love enters the building. 12:51 is the time. Patrick's in Belfast. Patrick, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. You keeping well?
I'm grand, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad. Yes, well, just to kind of echo some of your texts you got there, just to say to Ben, I'm 6'4", and whenever I first went onto the dating sites, I was hardly batting on my way with a stick. But I only kind of joined the dating scene during COVID.
Right.
I'd been in long-term relationships, and I was 34 and using the dating apps for the first time. And I didn't have a clue what was going on. I was completely overwhelmed and inundated and just sort of, didn't know what I was doing, really. And
but you were popular. You were popular, were you?
I was making matches, but I wasn't actually meeting up with anyone, because it was almost like everybody was just sort of chatting or even swiping just for...
Right.
I don't know what. But I actually found out after a while, like if I had... or matched with someone and I decided to go out with them, and if somebody else had asked me, if I wanted to go out with them, I kind of turned them down, because, I'm a bit more old school. I'm not used to this whole dating multiple people at once. And one girl actually berated me for it because she said that I would lose a lot of matches taking that approach by dating one person at a time.
So you should be going out and meeting as many people as possible. She was arguing.
Pretty much. Yeah, she argued to me that I would need to be chatting to 5 people at once and dating 3.
Oh, mate, how would you cope with that? It's like spinning plates.
I know. I could barely have the energy
with one. I've got one wife. That's quite enough. Thank you very much. How on earth would you? Oh, lordy! And that's how you play it. That's how the system works. But that proves my point. You're never going to settle down if you're constantly dating 5 different people.
100%. In fact, I unmatched with her immediately whenever I heard that, because that's just not. I wouldn't want to date someone knowing that I wasn't, like, that much of a priority. Like I was only one of,
true as well.
3 or 4 people.
I guess so. So where are you now? What's going on now? You're still looking?
Yes, although I do have a date this weekend, which hopefully will go
where are you taking her?
Quite well. Just the first date, so just meeting up for a walk and a coffee, maybe some lunch, just to get to know each other. But
good luck, mate. Seriously.
Cheers. But
I like it.
What I was saying to your researcher was, I think the reason why it's so... there's maybe more promiscuity, or there's,
Well, you're looking for sex. A lot of people are on there looking for sex, I imagine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but there is if you've signed up to it and paid your subscriptions because you think you're going to find your life partner. Have a good date on Saturday, Patrick. I'm being a bit glib, but that must be exhausting. Trying to keep 5 or 6 new connections on the go at the same time. A little clip of... full disclosure this week. If I said Jason Watkins, it's not guaranteed that you would immediately know who I'm talking about. You might. If I said Gordon Shakespeare in the film Nativity, then you would know exactly who I was talking about. I thought that was just our family, but no, it really isn't. If I said The Lost Honour of Christopher Jeffries, that extraordinary ITV drama for which he won a BAFTA, playing Christopher Jeffries. If I said Simon Harwood in W1A, or even Sergeant Dodds in MacDonald and Dodds, you'd know he's one of him. He's one, and he's a beautiful actor, a really brilliant actor. He also, for reasons that he will touch on in this little clip, has become a tireless campaigner for bereaved families, families who've lost young children, and the killer sepsis in particular, after his little girl Maud died when she was just 2 years old. And I like talking to actors, but the ones I like talking to most are the ones that if you met them in a different context, you wouldn't think they were actors, because they haven't really got the show-off gene. They've just got a deep interest in the human condition. And here you go. This is my thought for the day. The deeper your interest in the human condition, the better actor you will be. So here's a little clip from this week's Full Disclosure with the rather lovely Jason Watkins. You and your wife Clara have spoken often and with incredible power, and you've made a documentary about losing your daughter Maud. I mean, I'm bearably young, 2 years old, on New Year's Day 2011. And that, when I prepare for a conversation like this, and I hope this doesn't sound inappropriate, it looks pivotal both personally and professionally in the chronology of your life. She was lost to sepsis, which had been tragically missed by doctors. You know, watching you talk about it and reading interviews with you, you clearly could not have done any more to prevent it. But I presume that a crucial part of grief is believing that you could, or thinking that you might.
Yeah, that's the darkest thing that you're dealt. You know, that you feel that you should have done more, you could have done more, and that's a very difficult place to be, and sometimes it takes a lot of convincing from other people and also from yourself. But that's you've gone straight to the nub of it there, because that's the thing that kept me awake at night. It doesn't now, and that's almost the first thing, though, because of that I say to other families and the people that we regularly see and try and help, that the feelings that you had something to do with it is that you could have been. You think, I should have been a better parent. Why didn't I ask the doctors that it was sepsis? Why did I let Maud be discharged? Shouldn't I have screamed and said she should? I mean, that may not have helped even then, you know, because the sepsis would already taken hold. So, it was. Every time we talk about it, I slow down. I stop waffling because I want to find the right words, and it's not just for me, but for everybody else. And I don't want to tie it in a ribbon and make it convenient. You know, it was a real. Our life was so different before to after, and life has been divided into before Maud's death and after Maud's death. And there are, despite the horrors of the first few weeks and months and the despair and sheer bleakness of it and wanting time to go backwards and everything appearing different that was, you thought you knew what it was. Everything's perceived differently and almost in brighter colours. You know, despite all that, there has been clarity of thought in other areas. There's been, you know, you separate the wheat from the chaff a bit. You haven't got the emotional energy to deal with some things, and you focus perhaps on what is important, which maybe you couldn't have known before.
Really powerful stuff, and also lots of showbiz and laughter as well. Just a really nice man. You know what I always say about Full Disclosure is that I only ask people on if I think I'm going to really, really like them. It's the best possible criteria for an interview series. And do you want to come on?
I'd love to come on.
Would you really?
Yeah.
It's a date. Can we sign up, Sheila? Yeah, just delete this, will you, from the podcast. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. We must get her on Full Disclosure.
I'd love to.
She'd be great, wouldn't she?
We'll wait and see.
James O'Brien on LBC.